Haberu, an ancient slur given to wandering people with no place to call home. The Habiru were like today's gypsies, considered nuisances or at best, and threats at worst. Sociologists estimate there are more displaced people, Habiru, in the world today than in any time in human history. Civil wars, unfettered criminal violence, and economic desperation have driven millions of people from their homes and families. Having no choice, they wander in search of places of safety and somewhere new to begin life again. Hope for Humanity welcomes you in the spirit of love. We believe in approaching strangers with warmth, humbleness, and curiosity, extending hospitality to all we meet.
Theologian Walter Brueggemann, in his book, Interpretation and Obedience from Faithful Reading to Faithful Living, suggests that simple hospitality holds the power to transform our homeless world. Hospitality is the opposite of hostility, the defensive attitude that has become the norm toward strangers. From the time children are old enough to speak, they are taught by well-meaning, anxious parents, never talk to strangers. The gospel of secular society makes a clear distinction between insiders and outsiders. If you are a stranger, there is no place for you. Outsiders are not welcome. Brueggemann makes a sobering observation that the term Habiru may be the origin of the term Hebrew. In the biblical story of Exodus, the Hebrew people wandered into Egypt, escaping famine, only to become slaves to the Egyptians. The Hebrews were treated as worthless outsiders. Not even their children were safe. And on a whim, the Pharaoh ordered that all Hebrew male babies be killed upon birth. A remarkable thing then happens. God saw the terrible plight of these homeless people and heard their cries for mercy. He welcomed them, referring to the Hebrews as my people. God honored the covenant God made with Abraham, and in that moment, these displaced people found a home. Over 3 millennia, societies worldwide have ignored God's covenant and asserted authority over states of belonging, who is in and who is out. God's promises, however, remain. When people of faith show hospitality to displaced persons, they are making a prophetic statement. An act of hospitality states, these wandering people are God's people too. They belong here as much as we do. In hospitality, we join God in welcoming home the Habiru. Now we will enter into 2 minutes of silent reflection. We ask that you ponder the following during this time. What attitudes might we change to perceive migrants as human beings made in the image of God? Does our current political climate affect your perception of migrants? Does that perception align with your faith? What keeps us from offering hospitality to the stranger? What if we intentionally extended hospitality to migrants within our communities? These questions are being posted in the chat as well. Our time of silence will conclude with the ringing of a chime. We will then introduce tonight's guest, Michael Seaford. Hope for Humanity is delighted to have Michael Seaford as our guest speaker tonight. Michael has lived within Texas border communities since 1989, when he came to the Rio Grande Valley as a Roman Catholic priest. After 24 years of service as a priest, Michael married in 2009 and took up responsibilities as the network never for the Rio Grande Valley Equal Voice Network. This network shaped collective impact efforts on behalf of more than 60 community-based organizations and effectively brought the voice of the poorest of Texans to the tables of decision makers. Michael met the ACLU while serving as a priest, when the organization offered to advocate for U.S. citizen members in his parish. And in 2017, Michael accepted the position of Border Advocacy Strategist for the ACLU of Texas, working out of its Brownsville office. The position has offered him to continue to advocate for border communities at a time when national and state politics deny these residents the same basic rights enjoyed by so many other Americans. Michael and his wife live just a half a mile from the border. In the morning, they enjoy the sounds of the birds that migrate freely north and south without passports high above the border wall. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, and you made me feel very shy. But I'm glad to be with you. I wish we were all sitting here on our front porch, looking south. The river is just about a half mile here, but between here and the river is a neighborhood. And I'm watching this guy right across the street. He and his wife pack up lunches for people they sell at construction sites. And on the other side is a shrimper, who I found out early on was nice to be friendly with because he would bring us fresh caught shrimp. So it's a mixed neighborhood. One family speaks English by preference, although they're bilingual. The other family speaks only Spanish, and we all get along well. I have, unfortunately for everyone probably, but I found that the easiest way to go is a PowerPoint, so I can talk through some things. I don't know how much you've seen in the news about the immigration situation right now at the border. It's in all the news broadcasts that we've seen, I think fairly well misrepresenting what's going on. So I thought I would just like to go on. So someone's already asked, where on the border do you live? And I'm going to ask someone to read me the chats as we go through this because I'll be missing them. And I'm going to show you, let me share my screen here. So the title of the presentation is it's a call to action from our southern border. And this image was actually drawn a number of years ago by a French journalist who was basically following women who would migrate from a small village in Honduras and then go to Dallas where they would work as nannies or maids. And many of them died along the way. They were not seeking asylum, they were looking for work. So they tried to avoid Border Patrol capture, which meant crossing through a desert area just north of here. And this journalist was visiting with these family members in this little town in Honduras. And they said, do you know a place called Falfurrias in Texas? And she said, I don't really, but why is that of interest to you? And this family said, well, our 19-year-old is buried in the cemetery. And we would really like if you could take a picture of the tomb because we couldn't be there when they buried her. And that's the place we live in. It's a difficult place. Let me see if I can get this to, there we go. So the emergency on the southern border, this is a photograph taken about 1.5 years ago. It's actually my picture, as you can see, it's a little baby. The immigrants just on the other side of the border from Brownsville, which I'll show you in a second on the map, had been ignored for so long that they became desperate. And so one night they just walked up to the middle of the bridge and sat down, most of them kids and parents. And so the Border Patrol rolled out, locked down the bridge, and there was this just very strange confrontation that went on for most of the day. The immigrants had no real plan. They didn't really even have any demands. They just said, we're just being ignored, and we want someone to notice our situation. But I think the photograph captured and captures really the moment that we're in. It's just an extraordinarily strange response to children, essentially. But geography is important. This is the state of Texas. It's huge. I'm in Brownsville down on the right-hand side of the map, but El Paso up to the other side is also an important border city, and it's 870 miles away from us. It's a big place. This is a close-up picture of Brownsville. It borders a town called Matamoros and a state called Tamaulipas, which is important because it is a state that has been racked by violence amongst narcotics gangs, basically. And because one group lost control, there's a fight for turf. And so the place has become so dangerous that the State Department itself equates it with being in Syria. And that's where many, many migrants pass through on their way to ask for asylum. This is my dad and my sister and myself with a friend of ours, Gilberta. She's from Guatemala. And because we're so close to the border, we're the closest land route from Central America to the United States. Gilberta came up, her story is complicated, but quite simply, she witnessed the president of Guatemala, so 3 years ago, order a massacre of a village at which she was a 6-year-old child when this happened. And she witnessed that. She escaped. She went on to live with her grandmother in another part of Guatemala. Then when he became president, she was asked to go to court to testify against him, and she did. And so her life was placed in danger. She hid her 3 children with another sister in another part of the country, came to the United States, asked for asylum with all kinds of documentation. She was really afraid for her life. And then she spent the next 2 years in jail while they processed her claim. And so at one point she ended up living with my wife and I here. She made her way further north. And as she did that trip, I asked her, well, where is it that you want to go? And she said, Opelika, Alabama, which is this tiny town right outside of Auburn, Alabama. We stopped along the way. My family's from Birmingham. And she set up home there. I asked her, why did you want to go to a place like that? And she said, well, that's where my tribe is. And I just want to be back with them. So to the moment, there's always been migration. It looks very different, though, over the last couple of years. What's disturbing and of great concern to those of us who live here and advocate for migrants is the way this present moment is being played out in the media. So at the present time, there are, if you look at the search, and this is all in a document that's going to be in the chat. If not sent to you earlier, you can look at it at your leisure. But it's done by the Washington Office of Latin America. They do very good work, good data. And essentially what they show in this chart and the other charts is that there is an increase in people coming across the border, but it's not the end of the world. It's not really even particularly extraordinary. According to their own data that they look over the last, I think it was 114 months, the number of people being apprehended by Border Patrol right now is 77th. So it's not a big deal right now. What we are seeing, though, that is different are the number of children coming. And that's of just extraordinary concern. And at the end of the day, like how we deal with this as religious communities, and I think it's really important that the religious community, people of faith, do address this, is can we take care of these families? Not should they be here, not should they should not be here, but these are the wandering people. This is the body of Christ as it presents itself to us. This is a photograph of my wife. She's a pediatrician in a respite center, and she's taking care of these kids. One interesting way that one response to this has been that we can actually take care of these families can be seen at her website, where they describe just one of the many, many projects that have sprung up over the past couple of years. In her case, they bring in a midwife, and when they encounter a pregnant woman, the midwife does an exam, and then very importantly begins a paper trail, so that when this woman goes to Raleigh or New York City or Boston, When she arrives in that city, she is already registered in a clinic. She's already got a community of care looking after her, as opposed to not having that set up. And she ends up in Dallas and is really literally just another poor person in America trying to take care of her coming child. But there's a context to this that's really important, and that's the Rio Grande Valley, where I live right here. It's four counties bordering Mexico. And these are stories from 1 month in May of 2018. And they demonstrate the opposite of what my wife and many, many other community organizations have been doing here along the border, which is, yeah, we can take care of people. The response of our nation, our federal response, was to separate children from their families, was to incarcerate people who legitimately and legally were looking for asylum. And so some things happened. This is one very sad story. A fellow was separated from his wife and his 3-year-old, and he killed himself. He was so desperate and sad. He was in some little hillbilly town just west of here, and so he kills himself. 5 days later, this young woman crossed the border of the river, not too far actually from where this guy was in jail, and the Border Patrol shot her and killed her. The interesting thing about this incident, and disturbing, was that they had crossed into a neighborhood much like ours, and somebody had their phone out and they filmed just after the shooting. And so they have the agents on film basically saying, this is what happens to you people. There was never a weapon found. They were people who were entering the country. And the classic way, so, well, they were illegally entering the country. Only in one sense, that it's a crime for anyone to cross. It's a misdemeanor. It's like jaywalking, for anyone to cross the border, whether you're a citizen or not, and not be inspected by a Border Patrol agent. That's what they did. But according to our own national law and international law, as they were seeking asylum, they have a right to do that. And that federal and international right supersedes the misdemeanor. In any case, she died, and to this day, 2.5 years later, nothing's come of the investigations around it. And then that same month, this you would have heard, we could listen to it, but I find it so disturbing. This is a tape that was smuggled out of one of the Border Patrol processing centers. They had about 800 people in there, and this is where they were separating the children from their parents. And we knew about it, people were upset about it, but it really wasn't until this tape was released that the Trump administration, at least at that moment, stopped that policy. It's a very, very disturbing tape. And the twist in the story is that the woman who smuggled the tape out had been working for the Salvadoran consulate as a social worker. And she was Archbishop Oscar Romero from San Salvador. She was one of his catechists. And they tried to murder her. She survived. She made her way to the United States, got asylum, was working this situation, and did a really brave thing to get the tape out. All of this happens in my neighborhood, in our neighborhoods. There's the kids here, lovely kids like anyone else. The sign says immigrant children. We also have rights. But it's a militarized zone. And I find it important to remind fellow Americans who pay lots of tax dollars and who believe in our country, the way we've set up the border is just way, way beyond what any place else would be considered a normal reaction. So these things have, and again, I'll send a slideshow to you, can look it up. But basically, this guy is a sniper. He's hired by the state police. And in 2016, a 16-year-old was driving a pickup truck down that highway that you can see in the picture. And a game warden tried to pull him over, and he's 16, and he's got 7 men in the back of his truck under a tarp, and he just keeps going. So the state troopers call out their helicopter, and this is all captured on video. And essentially the guy tries to shoot out the tires, but the fellow, his commanding officer, is saying, well, try first for the tires before you go for the driver. So it was like a war zone, except that this is just down the road from us. Underneath that, there's a little dialogue from a Texas state trooper. Texas has spent $2 billion on having state troopers come just to our neighborhood, to these neighborhoods here. And their job is to find undocumented people. Well, in our neck of the woods, lots and lots of families have a situation in which, for instance, grandpa comes up from Mexico, he's got a tourist visa, he's here for Thanksgiving, and we realize that he's having dementia. And the family's like, we can't send him back to the ranch, there's no one to take care of him. So he just stays there, his tourist visa runs out, and now he's illegal, he's unauthorized, but he's part of the family. And that's the case in all kinds of different situations. And in this particular case, a state trooper pulls over an American citizen, 20-year-old, who had her soon-to-be husband in the car with her, with their baby. The state trooper said that her brake lights were out. When you look at the video, they don't seem to be. And she's standing on the dash cam of between the state trooper car and her own car, and there's a dash cam. And so you see all this going on. It's a 45-minute stop for a brake light violation, because what the guy's doing is he's calling the Border Patrol. And at one point, the state trooper talks to her and says, oh, so, your brake light was out. She says, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that, I'll get it fixed. And he says, who's in that car with you? She says, well, that's my husband. Oh, so is he from Mexico? Yes. And is that your baby? Yes, that's our baby. So does he have papers? Well, no, but we're working on that. And just with that alone, he calls the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol rolls in. And while they're coming, and she's standing between the two cars, there's a moment in the video where she just starts throwing up. And as a friend of mine said, that's when she realized that her young life and her young family's life was over, had been changed by this traffic stop. And then, of course, the other picture to the right are the parents of two of the men that died in the sniper shooting of the state trooper. So it's state troopers. Their main job is highway speeding, but this is what's happened. And for some reason in our politics, we've become so afraid of the immigrant that they've become more important than public safety. And then this is a very depressing slide, as all these are, but this is a particularly disturbing one. The sheriff of Kennedy County, Brooks County, which is just north of McAllen, so just a little bit, probably about an hour and a half drive from my house. He's charged with recovering the bodies of migrants that try to make it through that desert that I talked about a little bit earlier. And so he's kept photographs and records of all the bodies that he's found over the past 8 years that he's been sheriff. And this is the binder. He found in 2017, he had found 850 people, and he figures for everybody that he does find or that somebody comes across, there's 8 more out there. If you go through that folder and look at some really disturbing photographs, most all of them are men. There are some women. There are no children up until now. And so that's my great fear, is that if we don't figure out that we really can take care of these families will try to make that trip to the desert, and then they will have pictures of children in this book unnecessarily, completely unnecessarily. This is a photograph of migrants here. I've talked to probably 350 over the past couple of years. In long discussions, we just sit down and just visit with them. And I mean, the takeaway is that they're coming because there's no other option. It is not like they can stay in Guatemala. It's not like they can stay in Honduras. I've heard so many of these stories. They're never the same. Everyone is distinct and different. And what's happening now in 2021, apart from the pandemic, which has dried up work, apart from the fact that there were 2 hurricanes last summer that just devastated the area, and people are still trying to figure out what to do with that, there's famine. And then over all of it continues to be the extraordinary gang violence, the kind of thing you'd have to study to believe. I mean, it's just horrific. So in response, what does one do facing this? 2 years ago, Texas Impact, a group of mainline Protestant churches mostly, but with other faith communities engaged as well, partnered with the ACLU to start a thing we called Ports and Courts. So small groups like this would come down, and the first day we would go to federal court, and you'd be in court and you would hear and see people in chains being tried and they all admit to being guilty of entering illegally. As I said, it's a misdemeanor. What happens to someone who sees this, of course, is that your heart's absolutely changed, because you're in a room filled with misery. You can smell the fear. They're in the same clothing they were in for the last 3 days, and they don't understand anything that's going on. And the very first time we did this, I set this program up. I said, well, I need to do a test run. The very, very first hearing I went to, at the end of the hearing, the judge says, does anybody have any questions? And this woman raises her hand, but her hands are handcuffed to her belt because, you know, she's guilty of jaywalking. She raises her hand. She says, yeah, where's my kids? Well, the judge had no idea that that was going on. Excuse me. And he basically said, well, you'll find out that, man, when you get to immigration camp. And so we had church groups coming down, and they would see this, then they would cross into Matamoros and actually visit with migrants and hear their stories. But their mission was to witness, to pay attention, to notice things, and then to go back to their home congregations and talk about that, and talk about what they'd seen, so that their faith, their faith community wasn't just hearing what was coming across the news stations. And then there's all kinds of really interesting side stories. This one I love. This is, excuse me, this is Molly Crabapple, who's a artist from the Village Voice. And she came down, she went into children's immigration court, and she had done that previous drawing. And so the next day when she goes to children's immigration court, there's a big sign outside, brand new, saying, court artists are not allowed in without 6 months notice or something. So she manages to get in, and she's got her notebook, and so they won't let her draw, so she took notes. And so if you read the notes close by, it'll say things like, he only speaks Quiche, doesn't speak English. We don't know what's going to happen to him. And as she says, from notes, she went to drawing actual folks. And then the last thing, because I really would like to have some conversation if we can, people, because there's so many good people say, what can we do? What can we do? Most of the time, that first question is in terms of direct assistance, material aid, like what specifically can we do to help all these kids that are coming down here? And there's a lot of them. There are so many right now. The group that I like the best is called the Angry Tias and Abuelas. That means the angry aunts and grandmothers. There's exactly 8 of them, but they're so well connected, so well organized. Every dime that comes in there is spent to the place that most needs it right then and there. They're on top of it. They respond back. Just an extraordinary group. The other thing that's nice about them is that if you go to their webpage, or if your congregation is interested in doing something for Holy Week, which is coming up, there's several different options that you can opt to see how to help. But the biggest thing, I think, and for me the most important thing, is your voice, and that voice is to your own community. I mean, it's essentially changing kind of the conversations. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. We're not being invaded. Yeah, we're the United States of America. We make aircraft carriers. We could take care of 100,000 kids. There's not 100,000 kids. If there were, we could still take care of them. That's the kind of stuff we do. And I know when I went to Sunday school growing up and into seminary, that was the best led life, was being able to save a life, to pick up a life and take care of it. So this moment, which is depicted as a crisis, is actually an extraordinary opportunity for people of faith. I know growing up, in the romantic youth, I often thought, oh, it would be great to be the Good Samaritan. What a great thing, and kind of look out for that opportunity. Well, this opportunity is here. If you live here in the Rio Grande, it's daily. And every single day, despite COVID, despite all the other issues, because all of our folks have jobs, people show up at the bus station where 50 to 100 families are released, and they're going off into a new world. They have no idea what they're going to. They're terrified, they're afraid, and so you get the opportunity to sit down and be friends with them. But you don't have to live in Brownsville or along the Rio Grande to have that opportunity, because they're going to North Carolina, and they're going all up and down the East Coast. They're in our towns and villages. They're the sweetest people who are terrified and lonely. My my personal tip to folks, when you sit down at this, this person's got a little bag with the sandwich and they're going to Iowa. I have no idea. They can't say Sioux City. They don't even know where that is. So we talk a little bit. I explain how they change buses. But my biggest piece of advice is once you get there and get settled down, you have got to find a community. You've got to go to a church. Whatever your belief is, whatever you think, find a church. And if the first church you find is full of gossipy people, move on to another one. But you need to be in a community. You need to belong to people. And so they basically do that. That's the sense of community that they bring with them to us. So that's the final question to us. Can we take care of these families? And I think we can.
Karen and Sharon and I went to the border with Cindy Johnson, who you know very well, and that's where we met you. And we sort of had this talk we've been having, and we did go to court, and that was really very powerful experience for us. Just being a witness. People just don't realize how important it is just to go and see and be a witness. You can't really, you're powerless in that courtroom or you're powerless at the border, but you can, like you said, you can go back and you can be a witness to people back home. And
I think, yeah, sorry. And I think with legislators, that's the other thing I found a lot of times, like, well, they're not going to listen to us anyway, because, they think they hear us. And they really hear church people. I mean, they may act like they're ignoring you. Oh no, that's down. And it's, it's going to be a slow kind of change. I think that, I'm sorry, I just saw a chat thing. I think part of the thing is our message out is this is not the thing that's being made out to be. I mean, the vice president now is heading to Mexico and Central America. They're going to try and fix it. Joe Biden is speaking in Creole. It's just like this. It's okay. It's okay. And we find ourselves spending a lot of time parsing out data and stuff, which is fine, and people need to know that. But it sort of takes us away from the fact that this is about this family. This is about Gilberta, who when we were driving her to Alabama, my wife and her stopped. They went into the restroom, and my wife had open sandals. And she has her toes and they're painted. And Gilberta says, those are just pretty. And she's wearing shoes. And Marcia said, well, we could do your toes too. And she said, well, I don't have any because they all rotted in jail while I was waiting. Just like, what is going on? That's crazy, and that's not even the best. So there's stories and they're people, and they make great neighbors.
So there's another question in the chat. Why do you feel representatives listen to church people the way you have emphasized that they do?
The one thing they do, and we've got some really, really, I think I just have to say, dumb representatives in Texas. I think we have the world record. It's really extraordinary. One thing they can do, and they do really well, is count. And so a church congregation, I mean, I just talked to you, and we got a bunch of people here right now. You go back, it's a multiplier effect. And even if it's a small community of 50 people, they don't know that. They hear First Methodist and they're like, oh my Lord, the Methodists are after me now. Well, and I think that's one. The second thing is, for me, in any case, whatever foreign policy is, whatever domestic policy is, our policy does come from the life of Jesus Christ. And you read that. And again, my wife has very conservative, although Methodist, but very conservative parents. And they asked one time, like, why are you doing all this kind of stuff? I think she just come out on Rachel Maddow and was talking about the kids. And how can you do that? How can you be on that crazy lady show? And she said, well, Dad, Mom, when y'all sent me to Sunday school, I thought I was supposed to pay attention. The power of the word, I think, cannot be underestimated. They may try to ignore it, but yeah, sorry. If they will not look this child in the face and offer sincere help, and again, it's not like we don't have the resources. I think it's very hard for them to hear scripture basically laid back in their laps. Anyway, that's been my experience. I've done this for 30 years. So they hated when the priest showed up. They hate that. Yeah.
There's another question. You spoke of the East Coast. Are you familiar with what's happening on the West Coast? Seattle is where I live.
Yeah, I don't know yet. I do know, I mean, it really, this moment for the next 3 or 4 months. So this is the data part that probably needs to be understood. Why it's presently such a big problem is, first of all, COVID, but secondly, the Trump administration did an incredible job of putting a bottleneck. So to get kids, typically an unaccompanied minor, they call them, a child crosses the border. They're coming because they have relatives in almost every case. That's not 100% true, but most cases they're coming because there's a grandma or an uncle or somebody. That process typically takes a month in good times, and it's a month intentionally because you want to be sure that, you know, it's not a crazy uncle, or there really is somebody living at this address and that kind of stuff. So that process there is supposed to be slow, and then all the other stuff that goes with it. But the Trump administration put out a whole slew of regulations that just slowed that down and shrunk that. So there's literally not enough shelter space for them right now. So they're ramping that up. In the meantime, they may well be sending them to Seattle. I think they're trying any space they can find. A great need that's been, we were speaking about this morning, but it's complicated, will be sponsors for the kids who aren't with family members here. And those are really hard cases. And it's a two-edged sword. I think it's a thing that the churches do have a great resource because it's a lot of good-hearted people. But it's a traumatized kid. It's a kid who speaks Spanish most of the time, or Creole. And so that needs some work. But it's all, you know, again, it's a thing we can do. And it's been done. Where do costs go when one does? So those, they're all volunteers. So pretty much all goes into Pampers, water bottles, food packets, sheets. Right now, a big need, and I just don't know how much longer this is going to last. A whole big group is in a place called Reynosa, which is just south of McAllen, so it's about an hour from here. It's a really, really dangerous place. And the one big shelter on the Mexican side of the border is run by a church group that had to close their doors because of COVID. And so it's just all kinds of Africans out on the streets. And Reynosa it's a place I will not go to. You're just feeling silly to go. So they're there. So with some of the monies that they managed to raise, they would rent out entire apartment blocks and create communities there. So that's the extreme example. The other example is medicines. It's the most basic stuff to get people to their next step. There's other organizations that do travel funds, do bus tickets and plane tickets when that's possible.
Michael, do you know of specific organizations that are helping to place the children? I think you know, in our experience when we've spoken with groups and done presentations and stuff, you know, most people are concerned about the children, the plight of the children. So are there, I mean, there's Church World Service, and the Lutherans have an immigrant organization, but do you know of a specific one or some that specifically work with children?
I think those are the well-known ones. I mean, the children are actually under the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And again, that's that's a whole different ballgame than 6 months ago. There was a guy named Scott Lloyd in charge of it back then, and it was not. Well, we still have lawsuits up against them for some of the abuse that went on. That's all changed, it's shifted. So they go into these private groups that are set up, and it's the Baptist Family something, BFSA. So it's an emergency group that does this in the meantime, and they're trained for that. But the sponsorship thing would go through someone like Catholic Social Services, Lutheran Refugee Services, and I can actually ask somebody who will know that better than I do right now and send that over.
Well, if you can get that information to me, and I'll pass it along to everyone that's on here, and I'll also post it on social media. There's so many questions that I have. You know, how does Operation Streamline affect? You know, what does that mean for for people crossing the border, not, I guess illegally and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Some of
no,
these questions, some
so
of
that
these questions have long answers. So
they do, and much of that's gone away because of the change of administration. So I think the Biden administration has goodwill, so that they're not going to do that. It's the Operation Streamline. Operation Streamline is basically the ones that cross the river and you didn't get inspected by a border agent, therefore you are illegal.
mhm.
And that's across the entire world. I mean, Germany for a long time had this big thing against the immigrants because they said, see how much crime went up. Well, the crime that went up was they entered the country. It wasn't theft or assault. It was like they came in without papers because there's no way to get in with papers to begin with. So that's a whole other thing. So our thing though with the Biden administration and with Congress is to keep the pressure on. It's like, remember, they're kids. These are kids. And they have a hard job. Our job is to keep them up. It's like anybody's there. And there's so many things going on in our lives.
I guess what I wonder is I hear in the news that people coming across are being sent back.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still a thing. That's accurate.
It's a huge issue. They're called Title 42s. So a year ago this month, when the pandemic was settling in, the anti-immigrant thing was going on, and the Trump administration was really using that to deflect from the pandemic. And he called the head of the Center for Disease Control and said, you've got to apply a Title 42, this very kind of strange power that the CDC has during times of plagues. I think it's been around since yellow fever. They can seal the borders. It all sounds like it makes sense. But his appointee to the CDC said, well, no, that's not going to work because there's absolutely no evidence at all that migrants are bringing COVID. In fact, it's the opposite. They get here, they get COVID. And so it's a blanket application of this across the board. And so what they've been doing since then, that would mean, well, I'll tell you a story. I called this nun that works in a shelter in Eagle Pass, South Eagle Pass. She's in Mexico. And I said, how are things there? And she said, well, it's really weird. Let me let you talk to this family. So this woman gets on the phone and I said, hey, I said who I was. And she said they had crossed the river into Texas. They had horrible stories they were running from. And they said, we walked for about 20 minutes and then the Border Patrol picked us up. They took our fingerprints. They poured out our water bottles. They took our jackets. It was in December, so it was cold. And then they took us across the bridge back into Mexico. And she said, we were really afraid. And we're going down the bridge and we could see the narcos, the drug traffickers sitting in their pickup truck. And I asked her, I said, well, did they do anything to you? She said, no, we look too pathetic, I think. They just ignored us. So that's been going on for a year. You basically get picked up and you're put back into Mexico. What happened on our end of it is that the state of Tamaulipas will take kids 6 and under. So those families stay here. However, what the Border Patrol did 2 weeks ago is they started filling up planes with families with 6 years and under. They would fly them to El Paso, take them off the plane, and then deport them into Juarez, which is in the state of Chihuahua. The state of Chihuahua will take those young families. I mean, you just think of the expense of that and what's the point? And again, to this, Chihuahua, it's 800 miles from here. They don't know anybody there. It's another dangerous place. Instead of, I mean, people say, well, what do you suggest? I don't need an army of Border Patrol people. I'd like an army of social workers. Or actually Methodist volunteers would be fine, thank you. And you talk to them, you say, okay, and here's a process. It's not like they're coming in here and they're just going to set up across the street and live happily ever after. They all want to be legal. This is the other thing I think is really important. It's lost. Like, oh, they're just going to hide in the shadows. Like, no, they have been in the shadows, and they tell us this over and over again. We're tired of that. When's my court date? Every time I talk to them, say, can you help me find my court date? Because they're not given one. Yeah. I think I don't want to lose this little anecdote because it's the one that keeps me up at night. I had somebody visiting and we went into Mexico, into the migrant camp there. It was just miserable. And so this woman says, she didn't speak Spanish. She said, ask her, like, why are they here? Like, it's so horrible. Why do they stay here? And so I asked her, and the woman looks at me in the eye and says, because we believe in you. We believe in the United States. Yeah.
That's rough.
What percent of those at the border are children? You know what? I don't actually have that. It's in that chart I first saw. It's, I don't know. I have to find out. It's like 15 to 20%. The vast majority right now are single Mexican men because the Mexican economy is broke because of the pandemic, and they are the ones slipping past. But they're not slipping past because they get caught. I mean, this is the other thing too, is like, oh my God, we need more boots on the ground. The average Border Patrol agent picks up 5 people a month. That's 5 people. This is a guy's working 40 hours a week. In those 4 weeks at 40 hours, he's apprehending 5 people. So it's, no, it's controlled.
Wow.
So.
Well, our time is slipping away, and you've really given us so much to think about, and thank you for answering all of our questions.
I so appreciate the time. Again, I wish I could sit there and have coffee with you. This is.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
Hopefully we'll get down to the border to see you again. We really want to do that, but we'd love to have you back another time.
That'd be great.
For a longer conversation.
Thank you, and I can bring some others along. We'll bring
awesome.
Cindy. Yeah.
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be awesome. We'd like that. So thank you for giving us so much useful information and for bearing witness to unjust systems causing so much harm and trauma to immigrants. We've learned a lot from you, Michael. Thank you. And your talk shows us ways that we can both serve and be in better relationship with our communities, immigrants, and the issue of immigration so often seems so overwhelming, and it's important to learn ways we can help non-citizens that are in need of our help. Hope for Humanity is a mission of hope. The goal of our monthly gatherings is to empower each and every one of you with small steps to change the historic and well-established systems of injustice towards migrants. Remember, passionate people working together bring change. Consider joining our ministry team. We always need help to plan and implement our gatherings and virtual workshops and in-person pilgrimages, as well as promote opportunities from partner organizations like the ACLU. Here are just a few steps that you can take that will help this horrible crisis and this horrible situation. Donate to groups, persons, and organizations that advocate for migrants and refugees. Organizations such as ours appreciate every donation received. Donations allow us and H4H to continue educating and advocating for the oppressed and marginalized. Check the chat for a donation link. Keep in touch with H4H to learn about new events and further resources. We will never send you spam, and your privacy is important to us. Check the chat for a link to share your contact information and get on our mailing list. Participate in future H4H online gatherings and in-person pilgrimages. To do that, you can navigate to our website, check out our YouTube channel, Instagram, and Facebook page to learn more. And you can also check the chat for links to those too. You can come to our April 29th virtual gathering, which is a really good follow-up to this gathering where we'll learn about community sponsorship of refugees from Church World Service. As Michael said, you can contact your state and federal government legislators. We have learned that they really do want to hear from you, and they like keep track of every contact. They're really sort of anal about that. So develop an ongoing connection with your representatives on the issues that you're passionate about. And of course, you can pray unceasingly, and don't forget to sermonize about this whole horrible issue. Thank you, friends, for your solidarity with oppressed persons and your passion to change unjust systems. We're so grateful you joined us today. We want to give special thanks to our invaluable tech crew, Jennifer Swan and Ivy Parker. You know, we couldn't do this without you. After our closing prayer, we'll open up the chat for 10 minutes if you have further questions. And I hope Michael will be able to stay on for that. Ask to be unmuted so as to speak your question by raising your hand in front of the camera so it allows us to see you and unmute you. Be sure to take time to scroll through gallery view and see people's faces and chat with each other and say hello. We look forward to seeing you next month. And now we'll close with the Immigrant Prayer.
Almighty and merciful God, whose Son became a refugee and had no place to call his own, look with mercy on those who today are fleeing from danger, homeless and hungry. Bless those who work to bring them relief. Inspire generosity and compassion in all our hearts, and guide the nations of the world towards that day when all will rejoice in your commonwealth of justice and of peace. Amen.
Are there any other questions? No questions? Okay, I have one, Michael. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about how effective the wall is and what do local landowners think about the wall, and do they just support it?
It's not effective, and landowners hate it. It's like you'll find one or two people who will say something silly. Well, I remember when it was coming through Brownsville, we took a group out to the neighborhood and said, they want to build a border wall. It's going to cross right here. And they'll be like, I like that idea. That's great. That'll keep people from crossing my land. And then we'd say, okay, can we show you where it's going to go? And they were like, well, what do you mean? So we had one of those long survey tape measures. And there was one guy, the wall was going to pass 50 feet from his kitchen window. It was like, okay, wait a minute, where do I sign? So, and then another group, they were really kind of difficult people. And they had a farm, and the wall went right across it. They let them do it. And then their barn caught on fire, and they had livestock. They lost like 5 horses and cattle. It was this horrible thing because the fire department couldn't get through the gate to get in. And I think the classic one, and she finally passed away, this poor woman, she was a British national that had like a cotton farm here. And she would always be interviewed because she was such a character. And she'd say, I hate immigrants, and they just come in here and they throw trash on my land. She'd go on and on. And then the reporters invariably are leaving, and there's 2 ice chests on her front porch, and they'd like, well, what's this? And she said, well, some of them like water and some of them like soda. And so it's just like, this is very confusing. And she hated the border wall though, because she had to do an extra half-hour trip to get out, and she was 90 years old. So it's sad. It's an extraordinary amount of money. I think it makes a kind of weird sense if you don't live here. But we took our grandkids were down here last week, and we did a ride right along the border wall. One of them, the guy 19, he's like, wait, it stops. Yeah, because it does. There's a section of it, and all of a sudden you just walk around it. So yeah, even if it didn't stop, you can get over it. I mean, it's just not a thing. I think that's one. I think the other thing I kind of like to bring back to people, no one really wants to leave their home unless they have to. It's like, it's where your grandma's buried, and it's where you speak the language, and you've already figured out who the people you want to avoid and the people you want to be friends with. And, they leave because they have to. And so a wall doesn't really stop that kind of desperation. And then the other kind of thing people toss out there is like, well, they should just stay home and fix things themselves. I'm like, this is a 20-year-old with an 8-year-old. I mean, maybe she had a strong community, but I don't think so. It's bigger things that work. So.
My suggestion to everyone is, and just reinforcing what you said, is go be a witness. We are going to have in-person pilgrimages, and we'd love for anyone to join us. And please share this information with others. And hopefully we'll go see Michael.
You're welcome.
And-
There's one last good question. It's a great question. Do illegal immigrants pay taxes? Oh, they sure do. They pay lots of taxes and they get no benefits. So it's, I mean, in Texas, the most repressive tax is the sales tax, of course, at 8%. You know, if you're really, really wealthy, you don't really notice it. But if you're counting your pennies, in Social Security, all that kind of stuff. So, and do they get any services back? I think only if they live in Massachusetts or California. North Carolina is like Alabama. Sorry, guys. It's not a good place to be for that.
Yeah.
So, but again, thank you so much. It's just what a great community.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I think we will close now. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we look forward to seeing you next month.